Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Vollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks, Dustin. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll convene the executive management team meeting for September 12th, 2023. We've got a roundtable of updates. We'll start with Mark Webster, our legislative director. Mark.
Thank you, Chair Postman and members Garrett and Vollendroff. With our own legislative agenda pretty much set, now it's time to focus on the many external issues and bills that we're going to see to kind of decide where we want to push and where we want to assist with that if we do. We've just now got everything we need to send our bill over to the Gov's office for today's deadline. I really want to thank Colin and Rachel's team for turning around the fiscal note in record time. So we'll just do that after the meeting and kind of let folks know that we could potentially have a delay because the code revisor was delayed in getting us the bill back. It's all done. We got it. So we'll meet the deadline.
Great.
The most important group of non-LCB bills include many that we've already been discussing. Bills that were alive in 2023 that will be back in 2024. And I think first and foremost, it may be the bill on cannabis advertising that we discussed at the caucus on Tuesday. And then we're going to be, Will and I will be meeting with the sponsor very soon. So he accepted that meeting just after the caucus meeting. So that bill obviously passed the Senate, so it doesn't need to go back through policy committees in that chamber. Another important bill in this category was the cannabis excise tax bill that the board did support last year, 1453. That passed two committees in the House, but died in House rules.
And that's to help medical.
Correct. It removes the excise tax on those who are on the registry. There are quite a few that we were neutral on in 2023, but that merit further discussion. And we touched on those in the meetings I had with all three of you last month. That includes 5377, which was about out-of-state investment in cannabis and would essentially eliminate the residency requirement for licensure in cannabis, among other things. 5291 was the bill about licensing, and we all met with the senator that would have required licenses to be issued on certain types within 45 days of all the materials being received by the licensing division. We had a couple of bills, and I know Will's heard about this from some stakeholders, that created a new tax level for spirits-based beverages that are low alcohol content, 7%. And then there are a number of bills that we kind of see every year. The Cannabis Commission that got fairly close last year, as well as proposals to change the distribution of cannabis revenue, how much goes to locals, how much goes to the general fund, all that. They didn't get much traction last year, but there have been some fairly recent changes. So I think that's just going to be one that we'll see perennially.
Whose bill is that?
That was Senator Wagner's last year, but I believe Senator Saldana had one a year or two before that passed. Very minor changes. That was before my time. I think there are some new proposals, and the one that impacts us the most, and we've been having a lot of discussions about, is moving the cannabis lab accreditation work from Ecology, who is currently tasked with that in state law, to the Department of Agriculture. So all of that means I think we're going to have another round of conversations in the coming months, so that we can kind of prepare, get the board's position known, so that we know how to adapt to this as they move through session. I should just say there are also two work sessions scheduled for later this month, one on the 25th and one on the 26th. The one on the 25th has to do with tobacco and vape use, especially among youth. There's going to be many state agencies presenting, and a nonprofit group, and our E&E folks will be presenting. The next one, the 26th, has to do with biometric age verification in the Senate, and then Justin and I will do that one.
Did it? On the lab bill,
yeah.
We've obviously lots of conversations about that. I just saw in my inbox there's a new version of the bill, or maybe it wasn't a new version. I think it was Ecology saying we're good with it.
Yeah,
so they're good with it. Where are we at? What do we have a timeline for sort of?
We do have some time, but obviously I think agriculture is looking to see where all the state agencies are on this.
But we still need some
we do
things in there. Yeah. Okay.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah, more to come on that.
So they're gonna probably submit their bill though today.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then, oh, out-of-state investment.
Yeah.
Oh, we should talk about that at some point. I don't really. I mean, we've never had a position, have we? In the past?
We actually have out-of-state investments now. Currently, our financiers can come from out-of-state. There's no out-of-state ownership.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think one of the distinctions they try to make is that in their writing of that, investment means an ownership interest,
And yeah, an ownership stake.
not financing.
Right.
Have we ever taken a position on the bill? And what has that been?
I believe we have, and for out-of-state ownership, and some, of course, has to do with social equity, right? That to considering the ramifications of having out-of-state ownership during our social equity. Prior to that, it was about being able to vet those folks that had out-of-state, that were out-of-state investors. That when it came to enforcement at the time, it was how do you hold those that are out-of-state owners accountable for businesses in the state of Washington.
Are
That's
we an outlier in compared to other states regarding this issue?
That's what we were told. I actually don't know it myself. Do you know? Choked up.
I'd like to know that.
Yeah, I think we should find a time to have a caucus briefing on the issue,
Yeah.
I think, and
I
hear
agree.
from divisions about plus and minuses and a little research into some of that would be
But
good
just
for us.
To kind of reiterate one of Becky's points, though, is that, and this is something I've certainly heard Justin say to the advocates, is that we're going to be kind of looking at this with that social equity lens in
Yeah.
place. Like, if you can say that this will help social equity, that's a very different discussion than if, this could hurt those brand new licensees.
And I am hearing that argument, but it's from the same people who've always
Very true.
advocated for it. So I don't know
Right.
myself, but yeah, so we should find time to do that so we can see if there's a position we want to take on this and what we would need or not want to see in that sort of bill. And this one also gets often wrapped up in, pending or imminent federal legalization.
Exactly.
Like what happens
Right.
then? And, I'm never sure I don't think we have to make too many changes before that happens. I don't think it's gonna happen really soon, but you could see where if there was, that calculation changes dramatically.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know, maybe it's a trigger thing, but anyhow, so let's find time to talk about that issue. Okay. Any other questions on ledge?
Mark, you mentioned the cannabis revenue. Did you happen to have a bill number on that one? I didn't catch it if you said it.
I'll send it right to you. I was just looking at it again.
Okay, thank you.
There were two of them last year, because I think one of them had an error in it, but I'll send that to you right away.
All
They
right, then.
both, because you said it was Wagner and then Saldana.
Which is a different session, so. a few
Yeah,
years
but
ago.
it's generally the same approach.
I mean,
Or
I
were
think
they-
there's always interest in tweaking that where you can, like,
Yeah.
certain folks feeling that the locals might need a little bit more, or others feeling, so much of it goes to the basic health plan. So it's trying to figure out where the balance can go. So between the locals and the general fund is often where the fight is.
Okay, interesting. Thank
Mark,
you.
do you think that we're going to hear anything about high concentration THC products, or have you heard anything
That's-
about that at all?
I haven't, and that's something else that, we might want to have a chat with some of the representatives who've been pushing those proposals. We've been trying to sit down with Representative Chambers as well, who had the tax by potency bill. So yeah, those are some other ones that could come up. I haven't heard as much about them recently, though.
This is another one where though, last year, right, there were two different
Yes.
approaches. Both would be called the same thing, sort of, the nomenclature is the same, but one was much more public health oriented, I thought.
Yes.
And one was not. It was more of a revenue neutral
Right.
approach that came from the industry.
Right.
So the details on that one really is gonna matter to us and.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's where, like, do we have enough information? Can we get enough information out of CCRS or whatever it is?
Right.
To really know what the ramifications would be.
Right,
We have
what's selling, and then we don't really know
Exactly.
what the elasticity or whatever would be, what happens to those things if you raise
Correct.
the tax, yeah. Okay.
Back
Right.
to the revenue one, and Becky, I think when we were trying to get the municipalities that don't allow cannabis, when we were reaching out to them, that was one of the things that, did we hear from them that they would consider based on that, or that it really didn't matter? It didn't have anything to do with getting more revenue out of it in there.
Shelley, I think I remember them saying that it wasn't about the revenue because they received such a small amount of revenue.
Right, right. But we were trying to use that to kind of see if that would help entice them to allow things in their areas. Yeah.
There is
Okay.
incentive for those jurisdictions that allow it. They get a little bit more of that local revenue. But as to Becky's point, it's a portion of a small number. So a lot of them didn't find it persuasive.
Okay. Move to licensing then. Becky Smith, Licensing Regulation Director.
So good afternoon, Chair Postman, Board Member Garrett. Okay, I was going to make up your name. And Volendroff. So I'm going to start with, I want to just start with short-term rental permits because there were some questions that came up this morning. So I wanted to address those. And so we are starting the short-term rental permits at the end of the month, that we have the application ready to go, that we're going to be doing training with customer service, that staff have created the forms that will need to process these permits moving forward. That I did want to mention though, that for distributors can only sell a product to those folks holding a license or permit.
Right.
We haven't found that in the past, and I spoke with emailed Director Wax earlier today that just to confirm that we haven't seen that that's something that they take that very seriously, to making sure that somebody has a license before they issue or distribute alcohol. These are such small permits and requests for alcohol. I'm not even sure that they'll be getting it from the distributor. Right. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then I did want to also talk about our 45-day pilot program for liquor licenses. That if you remember, and that Mark just mentioned that there was legislation last year requiring licensees to issue certain license types within 45 days. And so we went ahead and started that pilot back on May 15th. And that we looked at beer, wine restaurants, snack bars, and beer, wine taverns. And part of that was to be able to issue those licenses within 45 days. That the average time really was decreased from 66 days to 40 days. That 176 applications went through the pilot that were received. That out of those, 62 licenses were issued. That 39 within those 45 days, and then the rest in 60 days of the application process. 82 applications were withdrawn, which is a lot, right? So we did look at that the reasons that they were withdrawn. Some of it was a request by the applicant because they knew that they weren't going to be able to meet the timeframes. Some of it was because they didn't provide us with the needed paperwork within those 45 days. And then the other reason was because the opening date was so far out that it wasn't going to be possible for them to get licensed within those 45 days. So part of the information that we learned also from the pilot was how it negatively affected our applicants. That we heard that many were unable to submit the documents. They were extremely unhappy that their applications were withdrawn, that we didn't realize what a significant impact it would have on both customer service and finance, that because it required us to issue refunds, that's something that, that impacts our customer service and our finance side. So we're going back now and we're revisiting the pilot. We're going to look at whether or not it makes sense for 60 days. We're going to look at including some license types that don't require a refund as well. So, so not to impact customer service or finance. That we're going to be talking to our BLS partners about providing some information on the onset of when somebody actually applies. So they know that, this license will be issued within 45 days or 60 days. And here's the information that you need to be aware of. Otherwise, your license will be, or your application will be withdrawn. So just, some more education. That we did some education, but certainly more education is always better. So we're going to get out there and do some more education for those folks that are submitting those type of applications. But so it was good to do the pilot. It's good to continue to do the pilot to reassess what needs to be changed. But certainly we have some pros and cons about those 45 days.
The BLS thing is great. That's a good idea. So we should make sure that you get a chance to talk to Senator Schessler before the session about that. I would just not wait for him to call us and reach out and say, here's the latest, and see if that bill's still going to move, because maybe not.
Right.
But yeah.
So I also wanted, did you have any questions? Jim or Ollie?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I wanted to move on to nightclub conversions because during the pandemic, we allowed nightclubs to be able to, those who served food, to be able to run like a restaurant, a beer, wine, spirits restaurant. And we issued about 67 licenses to those folks, or reissued their license. So now that the pandemic and some of those allowances are complete or done, that we're going to be sending out a letter to 45 of these licensees, letting them know that they have to meet the requirements of a beer, wine, spirits restaurant. Otherwise, that we're going to give them 60 days in which to do so, to make a determination. Either they can go back to a nightclub license, or they have to meet the requirements for a beer, wine, spirits restaurant. So we'll send out letters to all of those 45 licensees, notifying them, along with, we're working with enforcement on that as well. So somebody could go and visit and just provide some education to them.
How many is it?
45.
Becky, for a nightclub license to switch over to the other, what does that do or take from them, or what? What's the difference?
So beer, wine, spirits restaurant license allows them to, for a nightclub, you have limited, if any food at all that's required, that your hours of operation are limited. So you only have to be open in the evenings. For a beer, wine, spirits restaurant, you're required to be open for more hours. You are required to have a kitchen. You're required to have everything that goes along with fixing those items that, for food service. And the food service has to be I want to say complete meal, but a complete meal. So that means that you have to have a menu that offers different types of food other than just chips and salsa.
I have a question. If it's 60 days, is what it sounded like you were giving people. If they need to put in a kitchen, is that a reasonable time frame to put in a kitchen and meet the requirements?
No, they won't be able to. They won't be able to meet the requirements in 60 days for a kitchen. What we would do is probably switch them back to a nightclub, and then work with them on their requirements to get a beer, wine, spirits license.
So they wouldn't be able to keep it in the meantime.
Yeah, no, most of those 45 licensees are operating like a nightclub. They're open very limited hours. They have very limited food. That certainly, we're not talking about folks that have really operated like a beer, wine, spirits restaurant. I don't.
Go ahead.
Please.
Yes, just as a little background on that, because most of those nightclubs that switched over. So when the governor's proclamation came out, basically the nightclubs were excluded. Restaurants could stay open, but the nightclubs did not qualify as they were not really serving food. We scaled back the food service requirements for the restaurants based on a lot of the logistical issues that restaurants were having they couldn't always get the abundance of food that they needed for all of their meals. And so as we scaled back some of the food service requirements, that allowed the nightclubs to try to operate on that limited basis. And so they wanted to reopen. We provided that opportunity. And now, obviously, everything is kind of back to normal as far as all of those requirements go. All of those businesses initially applied to be a nightclub so that they didn't have to meet these other criteria. So I would think there, other than just having to go through an application process, I would think that there's probably not a lot of interest from a number of those businesses, if not all of them, to maintain as a restaurant if they have to meet any of those criteria. I don't think they'll put the investment into their business for that.
So let's, to go back, so we shut them down. Restaurants are allowed to operate limited, right? But you're saying, so the nightclubs were not allowed to operate.
Correct. Right.
What then did a nightclub have to do to be considered something different in this period? Or anything?
Yeah, they had to have some food service available, which, you could do short orders, and we were allowing at the time also. Traditionally, these restaurants have to make the meals on site and those types of things. And we had morphed a little bit even to say, okay, you can buy prepackaged sandwiches and meals and those types of things, which that really afforded that broader spectrum of opportunity. And so that's.
Then we said we can consider you a restaurant so you can be open.
Correct. And it was just to try to keep businesses alive, basically.
And now we're saying we're back to normal.
Correct.
You got to meet the same food requirements that a restaurant has to meet if you're going to go by restaurant.
Correct.
But
I would be curious to hear the response to that, because I'm thinking there's this place here in Seattle, what is it called? The Esquire Club. And that explains to me now why they were open all during COVID, but it was to serve to-go orders and food.
Right.
So now we're seeing somebody like that was doing that, they can no longer do that.
Well, they could do it as long as they meet the licensing requirements of a beer wine spirits restaurant.
Which would
What
again
is the-
involve them putting in a kitchen, which goes back to my thing about the timeline. So it doesn't sound like this is going to be a big issue, but it may be. So I'm
Right,
like,
we don't
Ollie,
know.
I would be
I want to
curious.
hear I'm
But
curious
why-
as the feedback.
But I'm confused. So if I were one of these nightclubs, I understand why 3 years ago I would want to be considered a restaurant because then I could stay open. Today, I'm open, nightclubs are open. What do I get out of this temporary designation? So am I going to care?
Well, they are open doing, the one that I know that was doing the food orders, they normally would have only been open on the weekends and, for night event. But what this did for them, it became a popular to go for people to come in to get to go orders and
So the
food.
nightclub could open at 10 in the morning?
So extended hours and then potentially more revenue from food they're selling. I mean, I don't
Right.
know, but I'm just guessing.
But that's what they were
wondering.
doing. And that's what I'm saying. It might have been something they never thought of, but it did lead to a revenue source because people go
today-
there now to get to go orders and
Right,
food.
But let's say we go through this period, can a nightclub sell sandwiches?
They can.
Oh, yeah.
You don't need the restaurant light. That's what I'm saying. You don't need
No, you
that
don't.
to sell the extra food if you want. So what do they get? Why would is it extended hours for nightclubs that are different today?
It's more alleviation of some of the requirements. And so,
Right.
setting aside, COVID, when we're looking at just the requirements between a spirit and wine restaurant and a nightclub license, spirit and wine restaurants have to be open a minimum of 5 days a week for 5 hours a day, a full meal service. They have to have it posted. They have to have the complete meals. Typically that involves, and we've lightened up over the years a little bit, but typically it's an entree and a side dish, those types of things that's prepared on site. Whereas a nightclub, your primary operating hours are between after 9 p.m. So between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. And so you're not open for those meal service times. You don't have to have food on site. You just have to have minimum food service. Like peanuts, popcorn, chips, those types of things for a nightclub, but not necessarily in a restaurant. So when the restaurants are acting like a nightclub, like they used to. They transition like, let's say at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, then they have to have a minimum food service, which is typically sandwiches, not the peanuts, popcorn and chips type
Right.
of a thing. And so there's even requirements for them if they want to operate in those areas. So with those two distinctions on the licenses, now that COVID allowances went away, if we don't change the rules that apply to those base licenses, they won't be in compliance, even if they put a kitchen in based on their hours of operation. There could be some interest in maintaining some of that, but with a nightclub
Right.
license, you don't have the food service requirement. So you could actually continue to sell your limited food however you want for it to go. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. For most of those people, they might just.
That's right.
Theirs.
And you know, that we're not so rigid that 60 days comes and we're like, yank that license from you. You know, that we always want folks to be able to stay in business, but they have to stay in operations within the law. And so, you know, that if they chose, like you said, David, to sell, you know, sell food on the side, they certainly can do that under their you know, under their license.
Yeah, and part of the reason that the nightclub license was created, it wasn't just to differentiate between the food service, but local governments really wanted to know what kind of businesses are operating in their cities. And because they couldn't tell if it was a nightclub or not based on the old criteria. So when the law passed to make the new nightclub license, if you will, then they were actually able to see, okay, these are how many we have. We can do appropriate police staffing for these types of things because there's usually a push out at 2 a.m. and all of those types of criteria. So they really utilized that to know for themselves what was going on within city limits.
Any other questions on this one? The board?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to hear if somebody responds and says, I have major concerns about this, I would love to hear about that.
I would too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And then the last thing is Small Business Fair. That's happening on September 23rd. That we try to participate every year in the Small Business Fair. That this year is the first year that it's going to be completely, you know, that in person, which is wonderful. That I handed out some information that we're going to be sharing at Small Business Fair, and actually it's really great. We have a one pager on retail and non-retail, just talking about the different license types, how much they cost, and then a description. And then the other you know, the other handout that we're going to have is talks about how you apply for a liquor license, which is always helpful because it's so confusing. And it takes you step by step, or this beautiful little
QR code.
QR code that I hate, but that everybody seems to love, that's under the age of 40, that you just click on there and you can have all types of information about helpful links of liquor starters guide, you know, how do you apply for a liquor license, Department of Revenue, you know, that, and free resources as well. And then if you go to the back, also more about, you know, how do you apply for a license, but also that it's available in other languages. So it's important that we're serving all, you know, that all languages. And so that's going to be a helpful hint to them as well. And then we will also be participating in another event with the small business folks for the Korean community. So we do have staff that are bilingual that will be attending that small business fair as well. So if you want any more of these, let me know. I'm happy to supply them, or licensing is happy to supply them for anyone. And I think
Clicking on it's not working.
it worked for me. I tried
Oh,
it.
clicking on it's not working. Oh, you have to take a picture.
If you take a picture.
Oh.
So Becky, if you hate the
Then I
QR
look forward
code,
to like
This is senior time, man.
What's that?
if you hate, what do you do with the restaurants now that still they never went back? And now they
I
don't
know,
give you
right?
menus. You got to do the QR code to get a menu.
Yeah, can we regulate that?
So I can tell you the restaurants that I frequent find me a menu. So it's like, tell them you don't have some menu, that's paper menu. So I'm always, for some reason, they're always happy to find a menu.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Smith, Communications.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead.
You're up.
The QR.
No,
code-
no, you're not up.
Yeah, I
Stop.
was gonna say.
Chandra Wax, Director of Enforcement and Education. Sorry, my apologies.
No problem. I have just come from the Silverdale office where we had a Ryder truck abandoned, blocking everyone in. So we had some adventure today. But I did want to say that I love QR codes, if that tells you anything about my age, according to Director Smith. So we'll get started. Lying. We'll go ahead and get started with education or enforcement education data. I did want to share that we had a kind of an interesting data month. And so I'm excited to tell you why and show you what some of the impacts look like. We'll get started. Thank you, Dustin, for driving. This is always just a good reminder. I like to start with some numbers from the first of the month so that when we're talking about percentages, we know exactly how many numbers we're talking about when our offices are out there in the field having contact with licensees and doing education. And then we're going to look at the number of complaints, and we'll look at the number of complaints over the last 3 months to see how they compare. But the bright blue, the last box on the right for each category, is the month of August. So you can see that we have not any large changes, although the one change you'll see in this slide and the next slide is that we've separated out our consultants. So we can specifically see the work they're doing, instead of having that combined in with the cannabis unit, although each of the units are doing a lot of great work. We are having the ability now to have some complaints go directly to the consultants so that they can just be addressed with education, because we know they won't end in enforcement work. So that is a modification we've made recently. Thanks, Dustin.
Quick question. What, you got a jump in cannabis? Any idea where that comes from?
Yes. So we did have, if you remember, we had some pesticide issues over in Eastern Washington, and some of that brought some attention to some product issues and traceability issues
that was in August. That's the August.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You'll also see these percentages stay pretty much the same. The percentage overall related to public safety of our complaints is 59%. And you can see that that varies a little bit in the industries, although it's higher in liquor at 76% as regards to complaints related to public safety. When we look specifically at education and violation, we throw in warnings and NTCs as well. You'll see that these are year-to-date numbers. 2023 is in the charcoal color, and they're compared there to the blue and light blue for the last 2 years prior. You can see that for AVNs, we are running right about on target to be the same at the end of the year. The use of NTCs has escalated, and we've been talking a lot about that at the board meetings. The board has had questions about the use of that tool, and it is an education tool. And we are going to be getting you some numbers to show that while it appears as though there's an assumed correlation between someone getting a notice to correct and then getting an AVN, we're not seeing a lot of connection there. Very few of them go from NTC to AVN. And the same is true for warnings. Although if you remember, NTCs are specific to cannabis. That was a legislative addition. And then our education contacts, as you can see, will likely be a little higher than last year. You'll see the same thing here. Less education in the third quarter than you saw in the second quarter. I think that's mostly related to staffing and leave. There are just some months that are busier than others. And then when we start looking at the breakdown of who's conducting those education contacts overall, this is also a by-year breakdown, the charcoal being 2023. You can, again, we broke the consultants out. You can see the level of education that is happening in comparison to prior years. Liquor is increased this year, and you can see that tobacco has gone down a little bit. The consultants will far exceed the work they did last year, which is good news. Licensee education, taking a closer look by month, you can just see that we're being pretty consistent in getting out in the field. One of the things that you'll notice in the data is that tobacco and vapor finished their contract sign our checks. So it'll look like their work dropped off a little bit this month, but the fact of the matter is they were just pushing extra hard to get their work done by the end of July and meet their deadline. And then when we look at the education topics, these have stayed pretty consistent. Regulatory is a basket that includes a lot of things that our licensees have questions about. They're great topics for us to be spending time educating on. And then we do a lot of education around youth access and public safety also, because even though that is a public safety issue, it is one that we want to use both enforcement and education tools on. And then, of course, partnering with licensing to answer questions and doing some new licensee support. And those are our top 5 topics out there for education. When we look at our violations, warnings and AVNs, and NTCs, you can see that we had 428 AVNs in liquor for 2023 and 302 warnings. Tobacco vapor, more warnings than AVNs. And then in cannabis, again, we're seeing that education tool being used very largely. And that's the presence of those consultants out there in the field. When we look at the topics for NTCs, you'll see surveillance system, advertising violations, record keeping requirements, required signs not being posted, and then failure to have the required insurance. So some of those topics that fall into that regulatory category. Not something you see typically on the AVN list. This is where we start to see a little bit of difference for the month of August, and we started digging in and figuring out what this looks like. Usually this top 5 list, in fact, I say usually, but I'm comfortable saying almost always, this top 5 list is representative of sale or service to the age-restricted products to persons under 21. And you'll see this month that we have some other topics up there on the top 5. And I'm going to tell you, upon further digging, you'll see that some of our compliance rates were at 100%. So some of those categories that typically show up, cannabis, for instance, as a top, when the top categories for AVN is that service to folks under the age of 21, we're not going to see that because we didn't have any sales in those areas, in those industries this month. So that's why it looks a little different. I also wanted to say, because you see number 2 here is failure to use and maintain traceability. Sometimes that leads us to believe or conclude that it's related to technical upload or failing to enter something correctly in the computer. And typically, because I recently was able to go through and do kind of a look at each of these cases, typically it's finding a large amount of product that is not at all traced at all. So that's a lot of times what these cases are, as opposed to that AVN title would lead you to believe that maybe it's something entered in a system incorrectly, and that's simply not the case.
Can I ask you about the zeros, the clients? Do you know, like, were we still doing them? Did we do as many as we did in a normal month? It's just so unusual to see a 0 for that.
For AVNs?
Yeah, isn't that what you said? There's, so on cannabis, tobacco vapor, no AVNs for sale to a minor, right?
Yes, so we did have a lower number of checks that month, and we have a slide on that. We had
Okay.
a lower number of checks in August, but we had 0 sales.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
had attempts, but they did what they were supposed to do, and they didn't sell to minors. So that's great news and something to celebrate.
Good.
Topics for warnings is pretty traditional here. The master sales agreement, the unauthorized alterations or change of trade name, masked misuse or authorized use of liquor licenses. These are things that you likely won't see on a AVN list, but this is used as a tool to get them into compliance before we have to move over into that enforcement tool. Next slide. Thank you, Dustin. Alternative dispute resolutions. Some of the wording on this slide was confusing to the board in the past, so I just wanted to point out that we changed this last column and we call it compromise not reached. So it has to be forwarded to the board for a dispute resolution. So I can't remember exactly what it used to be titled, but I do wanted to point out that they made this change just to be clear about what that meant. And you'll see that in August, we did have 4 where we didn't reach a compromise. So those will be ones that will be coming for decision. And those are just ones that had cancellation as a outcome. And so obviously they were unable to find a compromise on that topic. Liquor compliance for youth access is at 82%, the compliance rate, and we did a large number of checks, so that's a pretty solid, trustworthy number there. Delivery and curbside, we continue to have problems with delivery. For example, and when I say problems, we're now entering a period of time where there aren't as many folks doing delivery. And the 2 checks we did, one individual was unable to find the hotel we were at, and the other dropped off the delivery with the hotel front desk clerk who happened to be over the age of 21. So we didn't have any violations there. So they moved on to curbside checks and had a 70% compliance rate with all 10 of those curbside checks. And then cannabis compliance, youth access, we did 27 checks this month and had 100% compliance, which is great news. So kudos to our cannabis industry. And then we had a low number in tobacco and vapor. And so at 13 compliance checks, though, they did have 100% compliance. So also kudos to those industries. And I wanted to point out for premise checks, we often fly by this one and just point out how well our officers and compliance consultants are doing getting out into the field. But I just wanted to point out that cannabis at this point in the year has contacted 75% of our licensees, and that includes the work of our compliance consultants. So they actually will probably get pretty close to 100% by the end of the year. So that's a huge accomplishment, and I'm super thankful to the hard work of that team for getting out there and making contact with each of those licensees. And that's certainly not a detriment to our other teams. There's substantially higher numbers of licensees in those other industries, but great work on the behalf of our cannabis team. ID checks and youth access, you'll see lower numbers in cannabis. And one of the reasons is we are prioritizing right now, doing some case management and I'm losing a word here, triaging of our cases. We've had a large number of cases pending because of the workload and the staffing situation. And so we're working on moving through some of those and moving some to education and looking at how to best get through those cases. And so we've lightened the load a little bit on nighttime work hours. So this is one of those things that typically occurs when we're out doing evening visits. And this is also a way we believe we can impact youth access by being proactive. And when we see people who are looking youthful when we're out visiting our licensees, we go ahead and card them. So that's why we track this, because we believe you get more of what you measure. Criminal history information. Becky will vouch that this is a time when things are kind of slowing down a little bit. And because of the way we did licensing in October, these numbers will jump up a little bit. So you'll see these really increase as those licensing renewals start coming back in. Our examiner request, this is exciting. This is one of the things we're watching for on this slide. That bottom line, officer requests, was our top work for the examiner officers, the examiners. So we really wanted to see those teams working together, and we wanted to see those examiners being used to gather data and support investigations. And this is a great example of that work that's happening and how well they're partnering with that team. Advertising requests, if you're interested in that unit and the types of requests they're getting, one of the main jobs of that unit, in addition to reviewing proposals, is to answer questions and just be available to licensees when they have questions. And so these are some of those topics. FDA, obviously this is a contract team, and we aren't able to claim their data or stats as ours. They like it per contract when we keep this separate. But I do just want to make sure our board is aware that this is additional work that's happening out there. LCB employees with an FDA commission out there doing compliance checks and inspections, an additional 632 in the third quarter. And they are having a similar compliance rate, although we did have 100% in August. That's pretty atypical, but our compliance rates are usually pretty similar, around 80%. Internal affairs, as you know, we are always very transparent about the work we're doing internally and externally. And in this quarter, we did have one policy violation investigation that was founded. Hiring and recruiting, you know, we have a high number of vacancies. I will say last week, I did attend the graduation of 2 LEOs over in Spokane at the Regional Academy. Thank you, Board Member Vollendraff, for attending that with us. And then Board Chair Postman and Director Lucella attended our swearing in yesterday, where we swore in 6 additional employees. So we are making a dent, and we are finding ways to do recruiting, and then also finding some opportunities to enhance recruitment and retention in other ways to be creative. And then the board likes to hear about our partnerships, and I just want to say that that's one of the things that enforcement does well. There are so many other state agencies and even our own internal divisions that we work closely with to get the job done, and just to make sure that we're supporting the work that's needed. You'll see several other law enforcement agencies here asked us for support. We have a lieutenant who's a member of the Law Enforcement Justice Council in Skagit County. Sorry, that's really small on my screen. I must not be a fan of QR codes. Of course, LCB Finance reached out and thanked us for our partnership to help eliminate delinquent and direct shipping reports. Pierce County had a shooting investigation they were looking for some solid evidence on, and it turns out we were able to help them get some licensee video to help with that investigation. Communications has been a great partner. We've been working with them on translation services for the future and the website. We've been trying to help out with hiring panels across the agencies. We recently, as you know, assisted with the WSP fatality collision investigation. Working a lot with many different agencies and internally, just on the hiccups and challenges that come along with having electric vehicles. HR has been helpful with several different projects. And then as we move forward and look at traceability, working with the management team and internally with E&E, just to start looking at what we want that scope to look like. So do you have any questions for me?
I don't. I think we don't. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for all that. Appreciate it. Now, Brian, sorry. Brian Smith, Communications.
Thank you, Chair Postman, and hello to members Vollendraff and Garrett. I usually start off with the media. We maintain this 1 to 2 per day that come in, which is a trickle to us. It's a lot for some agencies, but it's something that we do on the fly. It's no real emerging or trending issues that are coming out through inquiries of us. They all seem to be kind of one-off and random. I would expect a columnist for the News Tribune, something coming out that I spent some time with yesterday. Just sort of an observation that he had, and he'd been speaking with a member of the industry or one of the people that follows our board meetings and stuff, and he was trying to make sense of some of that. And couple conversations with him yesterday, and I would expect something pretty soon there. I'm happy to follow up later if you want to talk about that anymore. And kind of a national story with Pluribus on the illicit market concerns. And I talked, that's Austin Jenkins, he calls sometimes. Spoke with him, but I also had a conversation yesterday with Jillian at Canra, and he'd reached out and spoke with them too, as well as other states. So we'll keep an eye out for that and make sure that we get that in the clips. On the social equity front, Becky didn't really talk about it in her remarks today because she's been so full with all the things that she did. Just to let everyone know that we followed up with a message to our broader lists and sort of reiterated the messages that Becky and her team did today, and linked to like the PowerPoint presentation and other things where they can get the information that they're going to be seeking going forward. So they have that now. And of course, that's to our website. We always keep that updated. On the Canra front, you've heard me speak before that I'm a member of a small group of PIOs or public information officers that are trying to help Canra with its all the work that Jillian can't keep up with and the team there because they have a very small team. But on the communications front, we met yesterday with her, and we'll be meeting more often to try and really put together a plan for how we're going to do this. And there were some ideas about having certain people on call for certain periods of time that would be sort of the manager of that information and the response. So a number of ideas, I guess, that I threw out too, that we can work through. And I'll kind of keep you updated on that as we go forward. I know that Jillian's very excited about it. And they've had some issues. It seems like something's come up the last 2 times. They've had a national sort of get together with how they do, because they don't allow a media into their closed door meetings when they have that, for a lot of good reasons, but it sometimes makes things a little bit complicated. So I'll be involved with that going forward. Continue. I just wanted to keep you updated on what's going on with the SharePoint Online. You've heard me say before, we're going to transition our intranet to an online version, cloud-based version that will take over the course of the coming year, but it's going to be phased in with the divisions each way along the way. So I lead now a core group of team that we're meeting once a week to work through the details of what that means to put together this project. We brought in Jessica Dang to help us. She's experienced in user-centered design, and I kind of want her and early to be able to help us with usability and getting feedback from people. I think she'll be good at doing that at the right times. So she's committed to being with us on the weekly meetings and all the stuff that we're going to need to do. But it's going to be a long-term project that's working behind the scenes. I just want you to be aware that that's happening and progress is moving along. So, you know, one of the things I would say to that, I guess, before I close it out, is that we've done a survey of employees, got about 30% of the agency to weigh in on that. It's not great, it's not terrible, but it was interesting, some of the feedback that we were able to receive, and we reviewed that yesterday at our meeting, and we'll be using that to kind of help drive the content and the view of things going forward. So it was a little bit enlightening. We don't get analytics really out of the current version of SharePoint, and to see how people use it, I thought was actually kind of interesting. We're going to be bringing that data to an upcoming director's office meeting, and we talked about whether we might bring that into the management team stuff too. And I'd be happy to share with the board if they're interested. So, okay. That's about it. Our ongoing, always got a number of ongoing projects and new projects and stuff, but that's just what we do. I don't think it's that relevant to this meeting here, but that's it. Is there any questions?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then, just an order on policy update.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Bollendraw. Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. I always forget the mic. Got a few updates for folks today. Just some highlights. I'll start with our tribal team. We've got 4 compacts in progress. There are some issues around dispute resolutions that we're working through, and this isn't just our agency, and that's what I wanted to share. It sounds like this is something in multiple state agencies that are parts of conversations right now. So if you hear anything about that, it's not isolated to one particular area. The Centennial Accord was rescheduled to the end of October, so we'll be participating in that. We've also provided the update for the agency. AT&I convention is next week, which is the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. And so Marla will be attending that, and we're putting out some messaging so people will know she's there in person. If they have any questions about any of the current rule sets and those types of things, that she'll be accessible. So that'll be a good opportunity to do some in-person connection. On the public health front, yesterday we had our first of two meetings on the cannabis web pages with representation from three different kind of perspectives. So it's a very small group, but we have consumer perspectives, research perspectives, and recovery perspectives. So this is to update our webpage, our websites on some of the information for consumers. And then next week, there's going to be a presentation working with enforcement education with the coalition in Tumwater around Substance Misuse Coalition, and that's through the Thurston County Health, Public Health area. We've also got another work group with DOH that we're working with, also with enforcement education is going to be participating. And this is going to be a consumer survey to inform media campaigns that DOH is looking at. So there's going back to the QR codes. We're thinking about utilizing some QR codes in retail stores as an access point for engagement in those surveys. And it's to really promote consumer understanding about if you're asking for test results, how do you read those? When you're looking at labels on the packaging and labeling, what does it mean? How are you reading those so you can have a better understanding?
We're talking about cannabis.
We're talking about cannabis, yes, thank you. And so those are some of the initiatives in that particular area. On the rules front, we've got a number of projects that, as you know, are on hold, but I thought I would provide an update since we did have some questions this morning. Basically, we're down to one rules coordinator right now, which I'll give a hiring update here in a moment. But with the limited staffing, we've had to prioritize some of the work. And of course, the legislative implementation was first and foremost that has to come through. We are prioritizing the older projects as they first came in. And so we'll be working through those. So right now, what we have on hold, we have the forms of payments, that 3-day payment petition that we accepted. That's paused. The minors on premises for licensed producers has been paused. We do have an active advertising, which we slowed down in while we worked on the potential agency request bill. So we didn't have too much crossover and we can understand what would we want to see in rule versus what would we be asking for. So now we'll probably be picking that one back up and moving that forward since we're no longer focused on some of those provisions in the agency request.
So but we will see it in the legislature.
Correct.
Again, so we might still.
Yeah, so some of those will be there, but I don't think that we'll have, as the rules are predominantly around the content versus what the statutes are. I don't think there's a lot of crossover that we need to be overly concerned about. And then we have the 5080. We've been working closely with licensing. And so we really want to launch that and be able to have the timeline. It's going to be pushed out further than initially anticipated, but that's predominantly because we want to do lessons learned on the applications that have come in this process and how do we improve that in the next rule set that we're putting out. So we're anticipating the 101 being opened in October. And so that'll start that particular process with the 102 potentially in March. And so we still have some timelines to work with there. And then there was a question around lab accreditation, and we're not really actively working on rules around that, but we are working with the Department of Ecology and the Department of Agriculture around the accreditation transition. We've been attending the class meetings. A number of folks, Chandra's team does a really nice job on those meetings and keeping that moving forward. And what we're trying to do is piece out what agriculture is planning on putting in their rules and what would that mean for our rule set? Do we need to repeal some rules? Do we need to clarify something? And then how does that crossover work? And that's really where the work has been in that particular area. We also have the sampling rules that are active, just finalizing the survey, the predominant survey results that we have. And then we're also looking at the medical cannabis endorsements. And so moving into the hiring area. So I have another transition that we're going through that we announced internally last week, but Dr. Kathy Hoffman has taken a position with the Department of Labor and Industries, so she will be starting that in October. And so we'll be transitioning with our research team for a new research manager. So I'm working closely with our new folks, and it's an interesting time and opportunity as we look and assess this, because we put together the packages last year to implement. Now we've set it up. We have some foundational pieces, and we're already learning on what directions and what we'd like to see and what types of background and criteria would be important for a new manager in that position. So we're going to be taking a look at that with the team. We have public health liaison interviews this week to backfill Mary's position because she's retiring in December. We have the rules coordinator interviews next week, so hopefully we will get that shored up here in the near future. And then the research manager position will probably be posted in a couple weeks. I want to get through some of these other things, and then we have a 6-week transition with Kathy, so I think that that'll work out pretty good there. And then the other thing that we're trying to do on the policy front is I attended a presentation this week. I attend the medical cannabis committee with CANRA, and they had invited a researcher out of Oregon to present, and it had to do with the medical cannabis market, but also some of the market forces and how consumers, not just medical cannabis patients, but other consumers prioritize how they pick product, what makes a good product for them, and how that drives some of the market forces. So we see this trend of high THC, but when they were doing their research, it was showing indications that there are other factors that are actually more important than that when it comes down to the consumer. And then, but the way that the market is progressing, and this isn't just in our state, but other states that have recreational and medical, how medical is typically negatively impacted from that consolidation because of some of the other market forces. People are trying to get those high levels of THC, and that may not be what the patients want. So product is not as readily available. So I reached out to her to see if she might be willing to come to a board caucus and present, because I think that would be really interesting for everybody to see, and it had some interesting economic dynamics. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions for Justin? No. When you said rules, we're just that's backfilling Cassidy's position, right?
Correct. Yeah, we have one active rules coordinator. We have one vacancy, and then one employee on extended leave.
Right. Okay. Yeah. A lot of transition. So, okay, great. Thank you for that. And now director's comments from Will.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members, Garrett and Vollendroff. Been a busy, I don't want to think about how many couple of weeks. Lots of internal, external meetings. Some of them, the Fraternal Order of Police, CANRA was able to participate in the prevention roundtable. Did what they termed a coffee with the E&E group here in Olympia. And it was a great opportunity to spend some time with them and do a Q&A. Spent some time talking about labs and proficiency testing. Let's see, Chandra covered, we were present at the swearing in of the new officers. Also lots of meet and greets, introductions and information sessions with a couple of representatives. 6, 7 Washington state agencies. And so it's been great. It was great to get to meet them and talk about the collaboration moving forward. So community stakeholders, partners, the Seahawks, we met with Seahawks leadership. It's intriguing. It was intriguing for me to kind of hear what they're looking at. Our tribal partners, the Squamish and Muckleshoot, got to spend some time with them. Washington Wine Institute, the Brewers Guild, some of those. So a lot of meetings on the liquor as well as the cannabis side. So been fortunate to be able to do a couple of ride-alongs. Did one with the liquor unit another one with the vapor, and then have one coming up with tobacco, and then cannabis. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to participate in the E&E in-service towards the end of the month. And we've got a session plan there. Continuing to focus on the operations of the agency internally. So, yeah, that's where I'm spending my time.
Yeah.
Any questions from anybody?
No, I was just gonna say, but like licensing and like E&E and like rules, you're just not busy enough. I mean, everybody's doing a lot of work and it's really evident and I appreciate the updates.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. And that is our last item, unless anybody has anything we forgot or there's any closing board comments or thoughts for anybody? No? Okay. If not, we will adjourn the executive management team and we'll be back next week for a caucus Tuesday morning. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for the updates. Bye.